Trash talking has been a staple in combat sports, and the man who revolutionized that in the sport of MMA was Chael Sonnen. But as entertaining as Chael was, he was never able to win a belt in a major promotion. So my question is, how good was he actually? Hey guys, it's Kiiyon, and today I want to talk about former UFC middleweight contender Chael Sonnen. Before we saw Conor McGregor captivate the world with his trash talking, we had Chael Sonnen, who I would consider to be the godfather of the art. But what about as a fighter? Was Chael Sonnen able to back up what he said? Chael began his MMA career in 1997, but then took a 5-year hiatus and came back in 2002. In his second fight, he would defeat Jason Mayhem Miller by decision. The NCAA Division I All-American wrestler and Chael Sonnen would keep the fights close by taking the clinch and bringing down his opponents. His grappling skills tired out his opponents as he did very well maintaining top control and throwing ground and pound. Although he wasn't really a striker, he did train in boxing since 1996. Sonnen began his MMA career with a record of 6-0 and won the Danger Zone Light Heavyweight Championship. But in 2003, he lost his first fight to Trevor Prangley by armbar and then fought to a draw with Akihiro Gono. After picking up a decision win against Babalu Sobral, he would fight Forrest Griffin, where he did have success early on with his wrestling, but he would ultimately tap to Griffin's triangle choke. Chael would close off the year with 3 straight wins, with one of those wins earning him the Gladiator Challenge Light Heavyweight Championship. In 2004, he would find mixed results after going 3-7. In this time, he also made his WEC debut by earning a unanimous decision against Alex Steibling. But this fight here is Chael against Keiichiro Yamamiya, who he was absolutely beating on during the fight with ground and pound. But Yamamiya would find success of his own and would end up winning the majority decision. In 2005, after Chael beat Adam Ryan and Tim Williams by TKO, he made his UFC debut in October. His opponent was Babalu Sobral, a man he beat 2 years prior. After a first round where Babalu was the aggressor and almost secured a heel hook, he would secure the triangle choke in the second that forced Chael to tap. In his second fight with the UFC, Chael fought the first man to ever defeat him, Trevor Prangley. But he found success in this fight with his wrestling and ultimately would win the decision. Then he would fight Jeremy Horn for a third time and would lose by armbar. Following this loss, Chael was released by the UFC and would sign with MMA promotion Bodog Fight. Chael would win his debut against Tim Crater after dominating Tim with his wrestling and finally finishing the fight with ground and pound. He would then win the decision against Alexei Oleinik after controlling him for 3 rounds on the ground. He started 2007 off by beating Tim McKenzie in 13 seconds by securing a Darce choke. He would continue the momentum by defeating Amar Solowev by punches via mounted crucifix and Casey Uscola by TKO in his hometown of Oregon. Chael would then go back to the WEC to fight middleweight champion Paulo Filho. Chael was dominant throughout the first round by imposing his wrestling on Filho, who at that point was 15-0 and considered to be one of the best middleweights in the world. In the second, he would take down Filho and attack him with ground and pound. But while on the bottom, Paulo swung his legs up and secured an armbar that forced the ref to stop the fight. But there was controversy as Chael said he never tapped. But the ref stood by the stoppage as Chael did scream when Filho continued to torque the submission, and he took this as a verbal submission. But regardless, Chael was so impressive in this fight prior to the tap that an immediate rematch was scheduled. But Chael instead fought top contender Brian Baker after Paulo checked into rehab. He would defeat Baker by unanimous decision, and in November of that same year, the rematch with Filho would go down. But this time it wasn't for the middleweight champion, as Filho missed weight for the bout. And the fight itself was super lackluster, as Paulo would constantly fall into his guard while Chael would stay away and risk of being submitted. But after 3 rounds, Chael won the decision and handed Filho his first loss. Following this fight, the WEC merged with the UFC, and Chael found himself back in the promotion that released him years back. He fought Damian Maia in his return, but he wasn't successful as Damian would take Chael down and submit him via triangle choke. But Chael would recover from this loss by earning a decision win against Dan Miller, who he fought on 22 days notice and had to lose 36 pounds in that time. In this fight, he dominated Dan with his wrestling, and that's what he did with his next opponent, Yushin Okami. It was another strong performance that earned him the unanimous decision. This gave the opportunity for Chael to fight Nate Marquardt in a title eliminator bout. And it was another spectacular performance by Chael, who took Marquardt down numerous times throughout the fight and escaped 2 guillotines as well. Chael earned the decision win and went on to fight middleweight champion Anderson Silva. Now this is where things got really interesting in Chael Sonnen's career. Anderson Silva at this point was one of the pound for pound greats in the sport. He was so dominant in his fights that people almost didn't care who he was fighting. They just wanted to see how Anderson was going to win. But Chael Sonnen stood out from Anderson's previous opponents due to the amount of trash talk Chael had to say in the build-up of their fight at UFC 117. Not only was Chael Chael insulting one of the most respected men in MMA, but he was really good at it as he was quick-witted with what he had to say, and this led to some of the most quotable and memorable lines in MMA history. So of course this made the fight all that more exciting as Anderson was not happy with Chael's disrespect. It really seemed like Chael was holding a stake right in front of a tiger, and that tiger was going to give the attack of a lifetime. But Chael backed up all his trash talk in the first round of the fight when he rocked Anderson Silva and took him to the ground. While on top, Chael would tire Anderson with heavy ground and pound. It was most likely the first round Silva ever lost in the UFC, and he would go on to lose 3 more rounds as he had no answers for Chael's wrestling. Going into the 5th round, it seemed like we were gonna have a new middleweight champion, especially as Chael took Anderson down early in the 5th, and since he was up on the scorecards, all he would have had to do was lay on Anderson for the remainder of that round. But with 2 minutes remaining in the fight, Anderson would throw up his legs and lock up the triangle choke that forced Chael Sonnen to tap. This fight was wild, and even though Chael lost, his stock grew higher than some champions. So of course an immediate rematch was set between the two. But those plans would come to an end when the California State Athletic Commission suspended Chael for 1 year after his post-fight test results showed that his testosterone levels were really high. He would also receive a fine of $2,500. On top of all of this, he pleaded guilty for money laundering in connection with mortgage fraud. This entire situation was messy, but Chael came back in October of 2011 to fight Brian Stann. After dominating Brian on the ground for the first round, Chael would secure the arm triangle choke in the second. But what was even more memorable was when he called out Anderson Silva, who was in the crowd watching the fights. But after this win, he would go on to fight Michael Bisping in a title eliminator bout. The fight was closely contested as both men exchanged shots on the feet. Chael was able to get a few takedowns in this fight, but Bisping would get up quickly and continue attacking. In the end, Chael was given the unanimous decision, which meant Silva vs Sonnen Part 2. And at the time, this was the most anticipated fight in MMA history, as Anderson Silva, who was considered to be the GOAT, truly had a nemesis that was a serious threat to his belt. Of course, the build-up was huge and many people picked Chael Sonnen to come out victorious. And it really seemed like that's what was gonna happen after a dominant round 1 where he controlled Silva on the ground and landed some heavy shots. But in round 2, he was unable to take down Silva. He would proceed to throw a spinning back fist that missed, and this would lead to his demise. Anderson would connect with the knee to Chael's body and would eventually finish the fight on the ground by strikes. It was a sad ending for Chael as he was so close to not only winning the championship, but to beating a prime Anderson Silva, which honestly would have been huge for Chael's career. Yet somehow after this loss, Chael would get another title shot, but this time at light heavyweight against pound-for-pound great Jon Jones. Chael was given the title shot after he originally accepted to fight Jon Jones on short notice at UFC 151 after Jon's original opponent Dan Henderson pulled out due to injury. Jon would decline to fight Chael on short notice, which would cancel the event entirely, but the promotion would still go on with the matchup at UFC 159. In addition to this, Chael was the most popular trash talker in all of MMA, and many were hoping to see that with Jon Jones. Yet the two hardly had any animosity towards each other, and when the fight did go down, Jon was dominant, and he did this by pulling a Chael Sonnen. He would keep Chael in the clinch and take him down to the ground where he would eventually finish the fight by strikes before the end of the first. In the post-fight interview, it was revealed that Jon injured his toe. It was bad enough to warrant a doctor stoppage had the fight not been finished in the first round. Chael Sonnen literally could have been the light heavyweight champion had he survived for 27 more seconds. Anyways, Sonnen came back 4 months later to fight Mauricio Shogun Rua, who he out-wrestled before finishing in the first round by guillotine. Following this win, he would fight Rashad Evans at UFC 167, where Rashad successfully out-wrestled Chael and would finish the fight on the ground by strikes. After this loss, Chael Sonnen became a coach for the Ultimate Fighter Brazil against Vanderlei Silva, who absolutely despised Chael, and that made for one of the best moments on the show's history. The fight was supposed to go down at UFC 175, but both men would fail their random drug tests prior to the bout. Not only would this scrap the fight, but shortly after, Chael announced his retirement from the sport. After this announcement, he would fail another drug test. Because of this, the Nevada State Athletic Commission would suspend Chael for 2 years. The UFC and Fox Sports, who he was doing commentary for, also cut ties with him. It really seemed like this was the end of his career, but in 2016, Chael signed with Bellator and made his debut against Tito Ortiz at light heavyweight. Tito would beat Chael in the first round by securing a rear naked choke. Chael would go on to fight Vanderlei Silva 5 months later in New York. He would go on to dominate the match with his wrestling, which would earn him the unanimous decision victory. He then made his heavyweight debut by entering the Bellator Heavyweight World Grand Prix, where he defeated Rampage Jackson by unanimous decision. But in the semifinals, he would lose to Fedor Emelianenko by TKO in the first round. In June of 2019, he went back down to light heavyweight to fight Lyoto Machida, who landed a flying knee on Sonnen before finishing him on the ground with strikes in the second. After this fight, Chael announced that he would be retiring from MMA for good. And I believe him, as he found success outside of fighting as a color commentator, podcaster, and basically anything that involves him speaking because, like I said, he definitely set the standards early for what elite level trash talking sounded like. But when we look at his record of 31 wins, 17 losses, and 1 draw, where he got as close as you can to being a champion without being one, my question is, how good was Chael Sonnen actually? I would definitely put him on the list of greatest fighters to never win a belt. I get that he lost 17 times, but even in most of these losses, he was still very competitive. He relied heavily on his high-level wrestling, and for the most part, it found him a lot of success. Especially when it came to his biggest test in Anderson Silva, where he outclassed the champion before losing. And that was the issue with Chael. His game plan for these fights worked well, but he would make little mistakes that would get him in trouble and ultimately cost him the victory. Chael's career was surrounded by so many what-ifs that could have potentially led him to a championship. And even though he was never able to win a belt in any major promotion, he built a legacy much more unique than that in my opinion. Because regardless of what his record was or if he was coming off a win or a loss, you wanted to tune in because you knew the build-up was going to be fun. Chael is nicknamed the bad guy, but people still couldn't help liking him, which makes me consider how big Chael could have been had he won certain fights. We look at Conor McGregor, who is known today as the king of trash talk, but I don't think he was better with his words than Chael. He just backed it all up with better performances in the octagon. If Chael Sonnen defeated Anderson Silva to become the middleweight champion, mix that with his personality and he would have been one of the biggest stars in the sport without a doubt. But even though that didn't happen, he still created a huge following. And what's even more impressive is that he did this as a wrestler, who aren't considered to be fan favorites in comparison to strikers. So I would say Chael as a fighter was very good. And even though his legacy won't be remembered for championships, we will never forget how Chael Sonnen brought the entertainment in MMA to another level. My name is Kiiyon and this was my take on how good Chael Sonnen actually was. Do you agree, disagree, or have something else to add? Please put it in the comments down below because I'd love to read it. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. But that's all I have for now, so I'll see you on my next one.